Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We are back with another episode of Daily Palantir. On today's episode, I want to talk about something a bit more philosophical in the context of Palantir, something we haven't talked about in a long time, given over the past 24 hours some of the events that I've seen unfold that have implicated Palantir, and I think investors need to understand Palantir's role and everything that's going on. But also from a business perspective and the trajectory of growth Palantir has over the future, I think the events we saw over the past 24 hours does implicate that. And it's important to analyze. We'll also talk a little bit about the stock price today because the stock did decline. So lots to get into. Let's get into it. Okay, real quick, the stock price. We're going to spend a small amount of time on this, not that much time because stock's down, entire market is down. Stock fell another 2% on the day. Now, the reason the stock is down is because of the macro. Jerome Powell yesterday said that the Fed is likely not going to be cutting interest rates anytime soon because inflation data is not good enough to cut those rates. As a result, the entire market took a bit of a beating today. Palantir was actually down a little bit worse and then recovered a little bit into the close and then fell back down to 21.31. I think we went from like 22.10 in the pre-market to 21.20, now back to 21.30. At one point we were 21.60, just hovering there. We're probably stuck in this 21-22 range. Let's see if we go below 21 and we get into the 20s. I think there's a lot of demand for shares in the 20s. If it falls below 20, that would be really interesting to see. I think the entire macro would be taking a tumble at that point. But yeah, for anyone wondering why are we down, it is nothing to do with the company, nothing specific about the company, nothing that I've seen about the company. It is much more to do with the entire macro and basically the market believing that if interest rates are not going to get cut anytime soon, then we maybe have to price in rates being high for longer, which means equities will take a little bit of a breather. Okay, let's talk about the events that happened over the past 24 hours. Now, this has been very interesting. For those that don't know some of these events or did not tell from the thumbnail on this video, I am talking about what has happened with Google. So right here, really interesting story that broke last night. Google employees are protesting the company for their work with the Israeli government. They occupied the Google Cloud CEO's office in California today and issued a protest in one of the NYC offices as well. Their demand is to abandon the $1.2 billion cloud contract that Google has to provide cloud-based infrastructure for the Israeli military. Now, why did I think of Palantir when this all happened? Well, Palantir has had employees protest in the past, but from what we've seen publicly, no mass protests internally have happened due to Palantir's very explicit support of Israel. Palantir has had employees protest with their work in regards to the immigration and custom enforcement, ICE, in the United States when Trump was president, and there was a lot of controversy back in 2017, 2018. But since then, I mean, I'm sure some employees don't like Palantir's explicit support of Israel, and maybe those employees have left, but there hasn't been like a mass protest in Alex Karp's office. Literally, these Google employees went to the CEO of Google Cloud, Thomas Kurian, and they occupied his office in Sunnyvale, California. Alex Karp's message to any employee who has an issue with their stance was to leave. And Google today will have to decide if they fire their Israel contract or fire those employees. Now, I believe 24 hours, the decision has been made that Google has gotten rid of some of those employees. A lot of those employees were arrested, and I believe some of those employees were fired as well. But I am looking for, as you can see right here in this picture, Googlers Against Genocide. That is what these Google employees are wearing as they protest against Google's cloud contract with Israel. I am curious if Sundar Pichai is going to say anything. Sundar Pichai is the CEO of Google. And for a while, Sundar has, been under some level of controversy because he hasn't really spoken up about these particular political issues. Now, what do I mean by he's been under controversy before and he's had to navigate this stuff? Project Maven. For those that know about this contract in the context of Palantir, this is an autonomous drone technology project that the DoD started, and they wanted to give this contract to Google in the Department of Defense back in 2017. Google actually led that project. The project used machine learning algorithms to analyze images captured by drones, and the idea was that they could autonomously target different targets that they essentially wanted to use without having a person sitting behind the drone and pressing a button, but rather the drone itself was autonomous enough to find the target and then eliminate them. Then that would be a more effective form of warfare. In 2018, thousands of Google employees protested the contract, and Google announced it would not renew it. The letter addressed to the company's chief executive, Sundar Pichai, asked that Google pull out of the project and announce a policy that it will not ever build warfare technology. So Palantir swooped in, and we ended up taking that contract back in 2022 after Google decided that they were not going to take that contract. I think that contract was worth about $240 million. And so Palantir said, all right, if you're not going to do it, we're going to do it. The reason I bring this up is because it's incredibly interesting, and I think it sparks a philosophical discussion around defense technology and what does it mean to invest in a defense tech company. Google employees basically are saying your support of Israel is supporting a genocide because they are disagreeing with what Israel is doing in Palestine, and there is plenty to critique the Israeli government around. I think there's a lot of nuance to how the Israeli government is operating versus the idea that Israel is committing a mass genocide. There's a lot of nuance there, and a lot of these protesters at the end of the day for Google believe ideologically that Hamas is not necessarily a terrorist organization, that they were fighting for their freedom. And as a result of that, the attacks on October 7th, if you look at some of the Harvard, Yale clubs that endorse the sort of Palestinian resistance, their argument is that they didn't really do anything wrong in the context of warfare with the Hamas attack. So these are some of the ideologies that exist with these people when they make these claims. And their argument is that providing cloud infrastructure to the Israeli government is supporting these things that Israel is doing. Now, what's really interesting about this is that this is essentially what Karp has been critiquing and been saying will happen with Silicon Valley companies that don't actually believe in anything. And he's been very explicit about the fact that when you have a company that doesn't actually have morals, that doesn't have a value system, that doesn't have a structural set of mission statements that they actually live up to, you're going to get companies with employees that are able to dictate the internal culture of the company because the company itself has not set a culture. And as a result, you're going to have chaos internally with the company. Here's Karp in 2019 talking about this exact same issue.
The core issue, though, is who decides. And to the people who want to reduce the complexity, it's commonly known that our software is used in operational contexts at war. Do you really think the warfighter is going to trust a software company that pulls the plug because something becomes controversial with their life? Currently, when you're a warfighter, your life depends on your software. They will never trust you if you pull the plug just because you're unpopular. The core
right there, Karp is talking about the operational or reducing the complexity to what Palantir does is an absurd thing to try to make sense of. So his argument is for the critics that say, oh, well, you guys are just a war machine, and we're going to talk a little bit more about sort of the military-industrial complex and Palantir's role there. His argument is, wait a second, if we're providing operational software used on the battlefield, we cannot take away our software in a matter of life and death simply because we may philosophically disagree with the country or government that we're providing that software to. No one will ever trust you if you do that. And Google is now struggling to, at this point, have to make essentially a statement or at least a proclamation of, hey, if you were to get rid of the cloud infrastructure you're providing to the Israeli military, can any country across the world that takes your cloud infrastructure trust you? The Oracle-Palantir partnership was so important over the past 2 weeks, not only because it's an amazing partnership and Oracle doesn't do partnerships like this, but if you read through the press release, there was a key focus on this idea that Oracle and Palantir will work together with governments to provide AI infrastructure, cloud infrastructure, data infrastructure that are in the interests of Western values. And when I saw that in the press release, I was actually like, wow, I can't believe they mentioned something philosophical in a tech partnership. And it's because both companies have the same missions, the same values, and they were aligned. They would not sell data infrastructure to China or Russia, and they definitely wouldn't take it away from a government like Israel that at the end of the day is one of the best democracies that exists in the Middle East, that believes in the sovereignty of the sovereignty of the individual, and that believes in those unique Western values that allow the individual to have some level of freedom, a level of freedom that is far more, orders of magnitude more than some of what the other Middle Eastern countries would give to different individuals. As a result of that, you need to be trusted. And Karp's point 5 years ago was that if you can't be trusted, you're not going to be able to survive in the defense space. Here's another little clip of Karp talking about this exact problem. Chad, one of the Palantir employees, actually posted this under this post I had about Google. And here's one of the arguments that Karp was making as well at the Reagan Defense Forum on this exact topic.
And I am not a legislator, but I am running one of the coolest companies in the world. And I'm telling young people, you are breathing the vapors of a dangerous, new, fake, and self-destructive religion when you are sitting at your elite school pretending because you watched TikTok twice and got an A+ on some crazy paper because your professor couldn't get a job anywhere else, that you actually understand the world. And you're not welcome at my company.
Yeah.
Now, the reason Karp is saying you're not welcome at my company is because all of these employees that think they understand the world because they saw a 50-second explanation on TikTok on what's happening with Palestine and Israel and tried to condense it down to Israel is the oppressor and Palestine is the country that's being oppressed, and then came to the conclusion that they're going to wake up one morning and protest a multi-trillion-dollar company that is not just serving Israel, but is serving many clients. And if they made a decision somehow politically based on what their employees said about Israel, that wouldn't affect the rest of their business, which would affect jobs, shareholders, etc., is asinine. It is absurd. It is something that you would think you have a TikTok type of education to be able to come to that conclusion. It's like Greta Thunberg, who believes that we need to fight against climate change, and she's going to sit in front of a busy traffic, a busy bridge in Germany and just sit in front of it and traffic can't move. Like, those people have real jobs. Those people aren't multi-billionaires. They have to get to work. You sitting in front of them is not stopping climate change. It's not bringing awareness. It's ruining middle-class working people's lives. And that level of absurdity, I mean, the paradox that these Google, I mean, it just reeks of elite privilege that these tech workers have, making products that Karpa said has religiously been a carcinogen on the youth in terms of the advertising products they're making and the products they're making that just make us dumber and like less intellectual. Yet they have a problem with protecting Western values, one of the only democracies in the Middle East, Israel, and Google providing some form of cloud infrastructure to make sure that democracy doesn't completely fall apart. Because if Israel were to fall apart in the Middle East, I mean, we don't even want to think about what the ramifications of that would be. The reduced complexity that these people have on these issues, which is what Karp talked about for a long time, I think really does matter in the context of analyzing the situation. So what does this mean for investors? What does this mean for people that are invested in the company Palantir? Well, I think it means we have to have a better focus on defense tech. So here's the All In podcast. This is a clip I saw this morning that I thought is really interesting and I want to show. It's a 1-minute clip, and it brings up the question of, should we even be investing in a company like Palantir that at the end of the day is benefiting in some capacity off war? Or are they? Let's take a look at this clip and then we'll talk further from there.
I don't have a problem with investing in a company like Anduril. America needs defense companies in order to maintain its defense. And the problem right now that we have is there's these 5 prime companies that are antiquated and really expensive, and we need startup disruptors to that. So I'm not morally opposed to it. In fact, I think it's probably a good thing. I think my concern would be, I don't really want to be part of the military-industrial complex. I feel like it might corrupt my views on things.
No, you'd want war. You'd be girding for war. That's your demand gen.
Right. I don't want to feel an incentive to be like these generals who go on CNN and Fox News and justify every single war.
That's my biggest fear as well. It's one thing to be investing in a bunch of companies where we're sitting around hoping for cheaper clicks on Facebook and Google. It's an entirely other thing to sit on the board of a company and hope for war. That's a horrible place to be. If you believe that America should be the most important country in the world and you have the ability to help it be that, eventually some of those decisions will come in contact with this kind of decision.
I don't have a problem with...
So that, I think, is really important to talk about in the context of Palantir. What Chamath and David Sachs are talking about right now is this idea of investing in defense tech and what it means for an investor, which is this sort of fundamental question. Do you need a war in order for your company to have any business and have any demand? I think there is a valid critique of the military-industrial complex and defense contractors that have essentially forced countries into conflicts and wars. I think the Iraq War is a prime example of defense contractors that were able to figure out, hey, if these guys go to war, then we could continue to supply services, and the profit became the incentive of the war, which is, you never want to see millions of people, thousands of people die simply to make money. Like, that's just, I don't think that's a planet we want to live on. And I think there's a valid critique and an argument to make there. However, I don't think that's a world Palantir operates in, and I don't think that is I think that's too simple and naive of an explanation for a company like Palantir. I don't think Palantir sits around all day thinking, oh boy, I can't wait till we get a war. I think Karp, which in 2022, that Stanford interview that he did January, and then February you had Russia invade Ukraine, literally in that interview, he's talking about there is geopolitical instability. This is not a kumbaya. There are certain values that are in the West. There are certain values in Russia and China that just don't agree. This whole sovereignty of the individual, this concept that people deserve to have freedoms, that you can say, I hate Trump or I hate Biden, and you're not going to get like your head chopped off. That doesn't exist all across the world. It uniquely exists in the West. And that's why the UK and France and Germany, we are allies with these companies as per the United States, because those things are worth fighting for and defending. That has been the entire argument of Western rationality and Western enlightenment. Now, That, I think, doesn't mean you want a war. I think it means you have to be ready in case those values are disrupted. So Russia invading Ukraine, and I know we can get super nitty gritty and go down a rabbit hole, but at the end of the day, it's a conflict of values. Russia does not believe in Ukraine's sovereignty, and so they're ready to attack. China, they don't really believe in Taiwan's sovereignty, so they might be ready to attack. Hamas does not believe that Jewish people should have the right to exist in their own state, so they attack. And as a result of that, when you have conflicting values from the West, the question becomes not, hey, how do we get into war? But if those guys that don't believe in fundamental freedoms, which everyone watching this video, I hope we all can objectively agree, Western values and fundamental freedoms are a good thing, not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's a good thing when you can have freedom of religion. It's a good thing when you can be gay or straight in a country and you won't literally get your head chopped off for being gay. That's a good thing. So if we can agree that those are objectively good, which unfortunately in America we have divisions where people don't actually believe in those objective good values. They believe that they're white supremacists. Like it's absurd, some of the internal divisions we're having in America. But if we can all believe that those are good things and the other guys are trying to disrupt those objectively good values, the only thing you can do at that point is be prepared not to go to war. If you have to go to war, then you have to go to war, but to deter or mitigate the ramifications of those countries or those special entities trying to do something to disrupt those unique Western values. So when I think of Palantir, when I think of investing in Palantir, I don't think, oh my God, we need a war for us to have demand. First of all, there's an entire commercial side of the business that does not thrive off government contracts. And, you know, we can go down that rabbit hole as well. But most Palantir investors know there's a thriving part of the commercial business that is very important. The government contracts they're getting in AI, machine learning, defense, etc., are not because the government wants to go to war. It's because the government needs to prepare if they were to go to war, or if they had to protect a country like Taiwan, because Taiwan's military is not going to be ready to go up against China's military, then that's why we need that software. That's why we need that tech. That's why we need those products. And I think in the context of deterrence, it's about defending yourself versus getting ready to have a war in order to be able to spend money on defense. By the way, if that were to happen, just speaking specifically about Palantir, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, the companies that make the guns, the missiles, the drones, they make the majority of the money. At the end of the day, Palantir is providing software. You know, there's billions in that, but there's hundreds of billions in providing the actual weapons. And so from a pure, like, logical standpoint, I don't think Palantir is like, hey, we need a war to sell more software. Rather, hey, let's sell you the software so that you don't get into trouble. This is what we're seeing with Germany that wants more Palantir software because there's more terrorist threats that are happening. We saw that video I covered 2 weeks ago where Germany's like, hey, we used to have Palantir, now we don't have Palantir. We have these terrorism threats. This stuff can really hit the fan. Maybe we need to get Palantir again to deter that stuff from happening. Versus if we procure Palantir software, there's going to be more terrorism, or we need terrorism to buy Palantir software. It's like, no, we need the software so that that shit doesn't happen. And I think that's how I philosophically think about investing in a defense contractor. And at the end of the day, if I believe in Western values and that company is actually trying to stand up for those Western values from a technological perspective, which is the moat when it comes to actually enabling some type of world peace versus just guns and missiles. If the tactical nuclear weapon is software, which Karp has said is what's protecting Ukraine, then that is something that I'm interested in investing in along with the commercial side of the business, not because I'm interested in having a war just to be able to invest in a company. I think that's an asinine assumption that you need a war just to invest in a company like Palantir. Rather, you need to recognize the reality and the inevitability of the geopolitical conflicts that exist. The fact that these guys believe one thing, these guys believe another thing, and if those come in conflict, you'd rather be prepared versus be scared that you don't have the software needed to survive. All right, that's it for me. I hope this was a helpful video and it made some sense in the context of philosophically thinking about this idea of Palantir as a defense contractor in the military-industrial complex and what it means for Google employees to be protesting the company for their support over Israel and the dichotomy between Palantir actually supporting Israel. Let me know in the comments if you got any value of it and if you have any thoughts or disagreements with anything I said in this video to analyze the bull case for Palantir from this perspective. I think sometimes it's also important to analyze the company from a more philosophical perspective because we spend so much time analyzing the day-to-day like operations that sometimes taking a step back and being like, why are we investing here in the first place is also important to kind of check the broader thesis that, you know, we may have on a company. That's it for me. Thank you everybody for listening and watching. DailyPalantir.substack.com, free Palantir newsletter every single day. You can subscribe to that for free. It's in the description. Please make sure to follow me on Twitter in the description as well. And I'll see you guys in the next one.